from, I'm interested because the grant that we're going to talk about is an international grant. And again, to discuss like where does all this money come from, right? It comes from wealth that's invested. So, for example, today we're going to talk about the Pollock-Krasner grant, which is named after Jackson Pollock and his wife and partner, Lee Krasner, two painters who were quite renowned. And that grant was started by their money, but that money grew over time because it was invested. And this is how almost all the grant agencies work. There's a certain amount of money that's created as an endowment, and that money grows over time. So not only do they not run out of money, they keep having more money to give away because the money keeps making more money. So, for example, the Pollock-Krasner Foundation has given away over $87 million worth of grants so far to artists. And, those are in amounts from like $5,000 to $30,000. And they've given grants to artists in over 79 countries. It's an international grant. So let's talk about that because I want you guys to consider applying for this. It's free to apply to, and it's money. It's cash that you can use in any way you want. So to begin with, I want to just ask or talk about what is a grant for you, and what does that mean? What is it? What's expected of the artist? And typically there isn't expectations placed on the artist. There's a few kinds of grants which I'll talk about, but the artist is simply doing their work and they're getting money for making that work or wanting to make that work. So there's a few different types of grants that I want to discuss so that you understand the difference between the two before we get into exactly how to apply for a grant today. You can research grants in a lot of places, by the way. No matter where you are in the world, you can research them online, but you can also go to your local library. And in a way, a local library is really cool because you'll talk to a librarian. There'll be someone there who can personally help you. And if you say to them, I want grants as an artist, and that's really important to say that you want grants as an individual artist because there are grants for organizations, but those aren't the ones you want to apply for. You want to apply for grants that are for artists. And if you go to your local library anywhere in the world, they'll basically hold your hand and walk you through the process of where to find those grants. But today I want to jump right into the Pollock-Krasner grant and the different types of grants that are out there that you could apply for. So there's basically three types of grants out there. And the three types of grants are merit-based grants, need-based grants, and project-based grants. And I'm talking about individual grants because you're all individuals. You're not applying for a nonprofit organization. And in that realm, there's two types of grants. There's individual grants, that's the ones we're talking about today that go directly to the artist. And then there's organizational grants, and those are the grants that go to foundations, that are nonprofit, that are serving often some educational purpose. Today we're only talking about individual grants. And so that's really important. The three I described, or that I'm going to describe, merit-based, need-based, and project-based are the three types. So I want to talk about what those mean because it'll make a difference between how you apply to them. There's the first one I mentioned is merit-based grants, and that simply means it's about your art, right? You show them your work. You may have to give them a resume or say a little bit about it, but essentially it's about your art. Do they like your art? Does the jury like your art? And if the jury likes your art, and you're competing against other artists, of course, right? They're looking at, say, 100 applications and giving out 10 or 20 grants. So, different jurors will like your art and others will prefer a different kind of art. And so, they kind of weigh them. They give them all points in a different system so that they can choose finalists and pick one at the end. But again, that's merit-based grants, right? It's based solely on your work. The Guggenheim grant, which is a U.S.-based grant, is such a grant. It's merit-based. It's simply about your work. It's not about the project that you're about to do, and it's not about how much you need the grant. So that's the first grant that I want to just mention, the first type, merit-based. Then there's need-based grants, and that's the one we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Pollock-Krasner, which is need-based, which means it's about your need for the grant. You know, maybe you have expenses that you can't meet. Maybe you have expenses for supplies, renting studio space, exhibitions, even attending a residency and offsetting living expenses there. That's need-based, right? What you need the money for. And we're going to talk about that today in the grant that we're discussing and that you can apply for. So the next grant is project-based grant. Project-based means it's a grant that requires a specific project. So they're asking you for, and the Awesome Foundation is one such grant. That's a $1,000 grant. They want to know what you're going to do. That's awesome. What's the project? What's the idea? And so an idea can be anything from, literally anything with that particular granting agency, from doing some kind of maybe public sculpture, or maybe doing a workshop, or doing something that's not even art related. They're not solely art related, but they want it to have some impact in the world. So it'll be about that. But today we're talking about a need-based grant. And so let's jump right into that. What does that mean? We're talking about the Pollock-Krasner grant. And I've looked at winning applications. I work with artists on this grant as well as other grants. So what I'm speaking from and to is not only the application, which I know very well, but also winning grant applications that I've seen. So to talk about that one, the link's already put in here, and it's good to see everybody and some familiar faces here. Good to have you guys here. We're jumping into it right now. This is really literally where the money is, right? We're talking about how to get to these grants. So the Pollock-Krasner grant is the one we're talking about today. You can see it yourself at pkf.org, but you don't have to go there right now, but that's where the whole application is, pkf.org. And there's a few elements to that grant, but the first element, of course, is, are you eligible? Is this the grant for you? And I suppose there's two sides to that, right? This may or may not be like just the grant you want, but the question is, are you even eligible for this grant? So to describe the grant, which I've described a little bit before, and this is from their website, the foundation of the Pollock-Krasner Foundation provides financial resources for visual artists to create new work, to acquire supplies, rent studio space, prepare for exhibits, attend a residency, and offset living expenses. Those are basically what they ask for in terms of, this is what we're giving money for you to do. And it's a great grant because they don't have a deadline. You can apply anytime. It's a rolling deadline, and it also doesn't cost anything to apply for. So what kind of artists are they looking for? And this is where, again, are you eligible? So reading from their application, their website, it's the foundation welcomes throughout the year applications from visual artists who are painters, sculptors, and artists who work on paper, including printmakers. There are no deadlines. Grants are intended for a 1-year period of time. The foundation essentially reviews expenditures relating to your professional work, and they give grants up to $50,000. The size of the grant is determined by the circumstances of the artist, right? What you need money for. The amount you've exhibited will be taken into account, and they assume that you are actively exhibiting. So there are some restrictions on it. I'm going to go into the details of how to apply for this particular grant, but the restrictions on it are this. The Pollock-Krasner Foundation doesn't accept grants from commercial artists, graphic artists, video artists, performance artists, filmmakers, craft makers, or any artist, and this is really critical, whose work primarily falls into those categories. So, and they also don't have an open photography program. And they don't make grants to students or fund academic study. And they also don't pay for past debts, legal fees, or personal travel. So that's really important to know, right? Because if you're applying for, help for paying for school or personal travel or past debts, even if they love your work and what you're doing, you're not going to get the grant. So it's important to know what your eligibility is. And again, I just went over those criteria, but you can visit it yourself at pkf.org. And we'll talk about more grants you apply for, because I also regularly post resources for grants in a number of places, but I do it on my blog essentially. Let's see if I can put that in here. Yeah. There we go. That I don't know if you can click on that link, but that's also the link to where there's a list of not only the grant that I'm talking about today, but also the Awesome Foundation grant and many others that I'll talk about in future talks here. So we talked about eligibility right now, right? That's the first criteria here. Are you eligible for this grant? And I went over the guidelines for that. And so the next thing is, writing this grant out, and how much are you asking for? Are you asking for $50,000? Are you asking for $45,000 or $5,000 or $10,000? The average grant that they give out is between $5,000 and $30,000, and that tells you that if you just ask for $50,000, that may not give you the best chance, because what they're looking for is again need, right? What do you need this money for? And what the kind of need that they are looking for, as I mentioned earlier, is very specific. To create new work is one of them. Like, you need money to buy bigger canvases or more paint. That's one of the things that they want to pay for. To acquire new supplies. Is your studio space becoming harder to rent, or you don't have a studio space and you want to rent something larger? That's something they help with, as well as preparing for exhibits. And even attending a residency if you don't have the money to do it. So having said that, the amount you ask for is important, because it should sound real, right? It should sound like, okay, I want $12,550, and this is basically what I want the money for, as opposed to a really even amount like $20,000, $30,000, or $50,000. And I'm not saying you can't ask for those amounts, absolutely. But it should be justified somehow, because part of all grant applications is they're getting to know you, right? So in the very short writing that there is, and I'll explain how to do that writing in just a moment. In the very short writing that there is, they're getting to know you, and basically they want to know, can they trust you? And your words and what you ask for helps them understand that. It's just one component in what's going on. But that's important. So so how much money are they giving out? And how much money should you ask for? As I said earlier, this is an international grant. They've given over $87 million in grants. That's no strings attached money, just for asking, to artists in 79 countries. So we want to go through the application a little bit now, right? We want to learn about how to actually do this, because I think it's important to just to jump into this and to begin to apply today. So I talked about, are you eligible, right? And that's the first thing. And again, eligibility is about, this is a need-based grant. You can be anywhere in the world and apply for this. And eligibility is visual artists who are painters, sculptors, and artists who work on paper, including printmakers. Not photographers, not graphic artists or video artists or performance artists or filmmakers. Again, you could be doing all of those things, but they want your work to primarily be painting, sculpture, or working on paper. So after you decide that, okay, so that is me, I'm eligible. The thing is, how much do you need? And how much do you need is important, because that's partly what's going to determine, from the jury's point of view, Do they believe that this artist really needs to have this grant? Does this sound reasonable? So again, make it real. Your budget can be very concise. This is all done in a cover letter, so it's prose. You're not really like filling out a form or anything like that. It's prose. It's you're writing a letter, and the letter should be exceedingly polite. Is kind of odd, but the form, I would suggest all the winning forms that I've seen start with Dear Pollock Krasner Foundation. Thank you so much for reviewing my application, and then you begin your writing.